Hello and welcome to the Pinwheels pregame show. I'm Mitchell Kaminski. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, this episode is sponsored by Homage. You scan that QR code, top of your screen, you can get yourself a shirt. Bear season starts today, so no better time, pick up some Bear swag for the season starts. The Bears season certainly looks much better than the White Sox season, or that projects to be a lot better than the White Sox season has been. Low bar to clear, franchise record, 17 losses and counting as we record this on Thursday, but the trade deadline just happened. So a lot to discuss in White Sox land. Let's get right into it. The biggest storyline heading into this trade deadline. This is Chris Getz's first trade deadline as the White Sox general manager, and a lot of pressure on him because he had some of the most valuable assets in the market with Garrett Crochet and even Eric Fetty, because that was a pitcher that even low market teams could afford, and it was a seller's market. There were not many teams selling pitchers. I mean, you saw what the Marlins got for their closer, who's just a one-year rental, what the Blue Jays got from the Astros for Kikuchi. Like, the teams were overpaying. So this was prime position for the Chris Getz to restock the farm system. Biggest guy who had the most trade buzz was Garrett Crochet heading into this deadline. And the White Sox kind of stumbled into this one. Now, though, you give him a little bit of credit because Garrett Crochet said he wanted to be a starter. They're like, all right, we got nothing to lose. We'll let you be a starter. And Garrett Crochet quickly turned himself into one of the best starters in the AL. He leads the AL in strikeouts with 160, despite being on that innings limit. So it looked like the White Sox were going to be able to cash in, get that big haul. But Garrett Crochet comes out with his agent, and he's like, whoa. Actually, if I'm going to get traded, I want a contract extension. And from Crochet's perspective, honestly, I think that was a smart move. I'm team Garrett Crochet on that one. His value has never been higher. Hello, Ian in the chat. Thank you for hopping on with us. His value has never been higher as a starting pitcher. Now, he's going to be in arbitration the next 2 years, but he's only getting paid $800K this year. And now he's one of the more valuable arms. His value's never been higher than it is right now. So he's thinking, like, at least while I'm with the White Sox on this team that's on a historic losing season, they're looking out for my best interests. All right, there's innings restrictions. My body feels best as a starter is what he's been saying. They're kind of monitoring his innings. So at least he can protect himself moving forward to keep that high value. If he does get traded, if he were to get traded during that trade deadline, he goes to a contender. There's no saying what their plan is. They might throw him in the bullpen, or he has to throw max effort every other day. And he's already said, look, I feel like the starter routine is probably best for my body. This is a guy that's already had Tommy John surgery and then only pitched in 13 games in last season because of some of the after effects of that. He had a shoulder inflammation that kind of popped up, and then he missed the beginning of the season because he was still rehabbing from that Tommy John surgery. So like, bullpen really ain't working all that well for me. Also, you have to factor in, too, that he'll probably have to pitch into the postseason because he's going to a contender. And so that's extra wear and tear on the arm. This is still his first season as a starter. He's pitched 114 innings so far this year. Uncharted territory for him. That's the most he's thrown in his professional career in the big league. So obviously there's a little bit of hesitation there. Like, hey, if I get traded, there's no control. So his agent and him come out and say, if I get traded, I want a contract extension. Apparently the White Sox tried to offer him one. Things didn't work out. But it's just one of those things that didn't happen. So the Sox said they're going to trade him. So that when that came out, that upset Chris Getz. And Chris Getz, he had a right to be upset. Let me preface this with this before I get into the argument why I think Crochet did the right thing. From Getz's perspective, it's like, hey, man, like, you kind of screwed me over here, because now these teams that see that are like, whoa, it's still as good as he's been. There's still a little unknown there. And so if have to trade all these prospects for this guy who, and another reason he's valuable is he's under team control another 2 years. I want to make sure he's going to be available in the postseason. That's why we want him. And if I have to use him in the bullpen, then we want to have to use him in the bullpen. So Chris Getz, when that came out, he was not too happy. And so he goes, this is a quote that he had the other day talking to the media. He said, the communication had been very strong between Garrett and I and his agency. I was surprised and taken aback how they went about it, considering I had a conversation with his agent the night before. That's not exactly the tactic I would have taken, being a former player. And so that kind of tanked his trade value, because after his agent had come out and said that, a lot of these teams that were interested in him were like, well, a little bit more hesitant. But here's why I think Garrett Crochet did the right thing, and his agent did the right thing. And I am team Crochet on this one. He's saying like, look, I'm under team control the next 2 years. Even with arbitration, I'm probably only getting paid $3 million like next year. So like if I have to pitch out the rest of my contract, then I want to make sure my value is still high before I hit the open market and want to get paid. And that is being a starter. And there's no guarantee if he goes to a contender, that's the role he's going to have. There's the risk of injury that's still there. So I understand where he's coming from that. The White Sox, they got to do what's best for them. So even if they're having these conversations, there's no guarantee they're going to do right by him. Now, I'm not saying Chris Getz would intentionally screw him over, but Chris Getz's job is to do what's best for the organization. That might not be what's best for Garrett Crochet. So Crochet wanted a little insurance. I'm all for that too. And I think he's previously said like he wants to stay here. This whole cycle of like we draft these guys and then like it comes time to pay them and then they don't want to, so we just trade them and then it's this never-ending cycle. Like as a fan, I'm sick of it. And even though it might not have been what's best for the organization, him coming out and saying that, at some point, I'm rooting for the laundry beyond like the field. Like Jerry Seinfeld had that bit from one opening monologue back in like 1995 for one of those Seinfelds where he was talking about how like essentially being a fan for a baseball team, he's like, really, you're just rooting for laundry because these players get traded and moved and like, you know, all of a sudden you don't like them anymore because they're wearing some other cities' clothes. Like at some point I'm rooting for the guy that was drafted by the organization, been developed by the organization, has been the only pitcher worth watching this season for the White Sox. Yeah, I'm totally on Garrett Crochet's side. Totally see where he's coming from. Now, I get where Getz has every right to feel this way, but Garrett Crochet is not the bad guy in this situation. The White Sox stumbled. Let's be honest. I don't think they even thought he was going to be this good as a starter. So they're trying to cash in. Crochet was like, well, hey, not so fast. I want to get paid first. And I think if the White Sox were to offer him a contract extension, if you were to give him, yeah, you'd probably have to make him the highest paid player in franchise history. You give him like Benintendi got $75 million. I think 80, 90 million for Crochet for multi-year deal, 3-5 years. I think that gets that extension done. Now the question is how quickly do you think you can contend with him? But I mean, he's shown that he looks pretty damn good as a starter. We'll see how he goes the rest of the way. But like the early signs are pretty positive. He's still pretty young. He looks like a beast. You get him and Noah Schultz moving forward, I still contend. Now they're probably going to trade him in the offseason, but I was happy get Crochet stood up for himself, and I wasn't upset at all by him, you know, low-key kind of screwing over the White Sox. Getz has a right to be upset, but don't let him paint Crochet's the bad guy in this scenario. He's not. He was doing what was best for him. He wants to get paid. He's earned that with his performance. If he goes to one of these contenders too, they might not have his best interests in mind. Another thing you got to factor in too, say he gets traded, let's say the Dodgers per se. And the Dodgers are like, now that's probably with Kershaw coming back. They probably would need him in the rotation, but say the Dodgers like, we want you in the bullpen. And Crochet, he wants that extension. And he's like, well, I'm not going to pitch in the postseason. But then he comes into the locker room where you got like a Shohei Ohtani and Freddie Freeman and Clayton Kershaw, and they're all looking at you. Like, you're probably, as a player, you're probably going to cave to that peer pressure. So I get it. That's why I think he was kind of happy, low-key, to stay in the Sox despite it being bad. Now let's get in to the rest of the trade deadline. So it was interesting too, because as I said, I think Fedde was their most valuable commodity because every team could afford him. He was only owed $7 million next year. He's had a phenomenal season. You look at the year before being KBO MVP. He had a lot of value for the White Sox. And the way the White Sox handled that trade, it makes me skeptical of what they would have gotten back for Crochet, even though they would have been selling high. So let's get into this trade. And this trade, it's not the players they got back. We'll get into the players they got back. I actually thought they got 3 intriguing guys. They needed some more position players. They got some infielders. So I was pretty happy with the guys they got back. But the fact that they had to give up Kopech and Pham included in a deadline that had a lot of teams buying and there was very few teams selling. It seems like that was one of those where every team knew the hand that Getz had. And as a rookie GM, like playing poker, like they saw his hand and he got bullied in these negotiations. Because that return was a little surprising. The fact they had to throw in Kopech. Now, Kopech on his own is not getting a huge return, but you gave up 3 assets and you only got 3 prospects back in return. The Cardinals made out like bandits in this. Now, Tommy Pham, let's be honest, his value is not really all that high. So that wasn't even, if it was just Fedde and Pham for these 3, okay. I wouldn't be, overjoyed, but at least it's like, okay, I can understand that. But the fact he had to throw in Kopech with this deal, who I still contend does have a lot of value. You saw his first appearance out of the bullpen with the Dodgers, he looked good. And people forget the Sox kind of butchered Kopech's development, especially coming into this year. He was training all offseason like he was going to be a starter. And then they threw him in the bullpen. So that kind of like threw things off too. I do still think Kopech can be a really good pitcher in this league. So the fact that he gave up 3 assets, he only got 3 back in return, and 2 of them are really young where it's going to be tough to kind of gauge. I was not crazy about that trade, especially later that night, seeing what the Astros paid the Blue Jays for Kikuchi, where they gave them a top 100 prospect plus 2 other prospects. And it was for a guy that has comparable numbers to Fetty this year. And I think Fetty has probably better numbers. That was a little bit like, come on, Chris, what are we doing? Now let's get into the guys. Now, as I said, I don't hate the guys that got back in return for this trade. They just gave up way too much for what they got in return. So Miguel Vargas, some of you probably already familiar with him. If you watched the game yesterday, he was in left field, had a pretty ugly air, did not look great. He's not really a true outfielder. I don't think they should put him there. Now, heading into last season, he was the number 37 prospect in the MLB. He was just kind of blocked. The Dodgers were stacked. We saw this with Michael Busch when they traded him to the Cubs. He was one of those guys that, like, look, I think they still kind of liked him, but there just wasn't a ton of opportunities for him in LA. And his 382 at-bats in the big leagues, he has gotten some action up there. It hasn't been great overall. A slash line, 215, 284, 380, 3 home runs, not a ton of power, but apparently he does have very good bat-to-ball skills. He uses the entire field. In AAA this year, he was hitting 290. So there is some stuff to like. I know that now with the White Sox, he's going to get consistent playing time the rest of the season, which I think will be good for him. He plays a couple areas of need, especially at third base, because Moncada likely going to be gone at the end of the year. So that he's the headliner in the deal. Now, the guy I actually like the best, the most intriguing one for me out of all of these guys was Perez, 19-year-old second baseman. He's now the number 13th ranked prospect in the White Sox system, but at a very young age, he's shown some pop. Last year, mostly in rookie ball, he had 10 homers in rookie ball, and then he got called up to single A late in the year. He had another bomb. This season, he hit in 264, 380, 420 slugging percentage, 10 home runs, 42 RBIs, and single A. So he's got really good, according to scouts who go to MLB Pipeline, his big thing, he's got a lot of pop for a young kid. He's got really fast hands, and he doesn't strike out a ton. Like they said, like reading through his bios, it sounds like he's got a very good command of the strike zone, and he doesn't chase a whole lot of pitches, which is something the White Sox need more guys that have that sort of good approach at the plate, because we've seen that at the major league level for a while. They don't have a ton of guys that have very good approaches at the plate. A lot of chasing pitches. They're always in the bottom 5 teams and walks. So I was very interested in Perez. Jury's still out on him because he's still very young, but second base, position in need. He's got some pop. I do like that. Finally, Alexander Albertus, another infielder, kind of plays all over the diamond. He has a very good arm. That's like the biggest scouting grade, is he got a very strong arm. Not much of a hitter so far, but it's kind of tough to say because he hasn't faced a ton of pitching. He hasn't faced a ton of really good pitching yet, like above his age. So he's just started in single A. He's slashed in 229, 317, 329. He also, much like Perez, this is what I do like about him. While he does not hit for a lot of average, it does sound like he has a good command of the strike zone too. He walks a lot. He's drawn 107 walks in his first 3 years as a pro. In his first 80 games, he drew 70 walks, only struck out 40 times during that stretch. So Albertus, I think that could be interesting too. We got 2 guys that sound like they have a pretty good approach at the plate. So I was not disappointed with the players that got back in this trade, but the fact that you had to give up Fetty, who I thought was your most valuable asset at this trade deadline, the most teams were going to be calling for him, and then you had to throw Kopech in that deal too, didn't sit right. If they got those 3 just for Fetty and Pham, okay. But Getz had to do his damn 3-way, and with the Cardinals and Dodgers, and very underwhelming return. Not happy with that. I would give them jury's still out to see how good these guys turn into, but I C- on that trade. Now, I thought the rest of the trade deadline he did do pretty well. After Crochet's value had kind of tanked, didn't have a whole ton to work with. I was not a fan of trading Robert, especially because his value is at an all-time high this offseason. If you're going to trade him, that's when you should have done it. Not right now, when it looks like he is completely checked out. Paul DeJong was the next man to go. DeJong was like one of those guys that you're only getting as a bridge infielder anyway for Colson Montgomery. He had no future with the team. he was having a good year. You might as well try and get something for him. And this Gerald Rosario from the Rosado, I should say, from the Royals, he wasn't ranked as a top 30 prospect, but this is intriguing for Paul DeJong, who, he had a lot of home runs. He was leading the White Sox with 18 home runs, but he didn't hit for a ton of average. The defense didn't jump off the page. And you kind of just got him as a bargain bin signing that you were going to get rid of anyway. So they got this kid who's a reliever for the Royals organization, 185 ERA this season in 39 innings in single A. He was 4 for 5 in save opportunities, holding opponents respectable, 214 batting average, over 10 strikeouts per 9 inning. I kind of like that move. You're just happy to get anyone for that point because DeJong, no part of the future. So, Getz, stamp of approval on that one. Eloy Jimenez. Now, this is the biggest one, I think, of the deadline. I was shocked when I heard that news had come out with Eloy because, let's be honest, he had really no value. He's always hurt. He doesn't play defense, and he doesn't hit the ball in the air anymore. His, strength was supposed to be his power, and it's all messed up. He can't hit the ball in the air. So this is supposedly more of a salary dump move, but I was reading today, actually, the White Sox are going to be sending Baltimore $4 million in money. They just got, they were just happy to get anything, I think, for him, but they're going to be sending him $4 million. Now, so Jimenez has a 2025 club option. The Orioles choose to buy that out. The White Sox only have to pay, I think, 1.5, or the Orioles, I should say, are only paying 1.5 million of that buyout if they choose to buy him out. So salary dump kind of move for the Sox. They did get a right-handed pitcher in return, Trey Magoo. Thank you, Ian. So Ian's the prospect guy. He knows a little bit more about. I mean, I'm not going to act like I don't talk about, but Magoo. Thank you for. I would have called that Magoo. Trey Magoo, a 26-year-old right-hander. I kind of feel that is they just wanted someone to help with the bullpen. He's got a pretty good ERA in AAA, 1.99 ERA, 54 strikeouts, respectable whip. So with a lot of the guys, especially Tanner Banks, leaving, the bullpen's been horrible this year for the White Sox. So I think that's a guy that you call him up pretty quick, and you're going to get a guy that's going to eat some innings for you in the pen. But the win was just getting anything for Eloy because I was shocked any team would want him, especially because he has been horrible as a DH too. If you can't play the field, that's one thing as long as you're hitting, but he's not hitting. The power evaporated. So that was very sad. Honestly, Eloy though, real talk, as far as the core guys go, he was one of the biggest disappointments. It just kind of made me sad the way that whole thing ended, especially because his rookie year, you saw how good he could be. 31 homers, and he was hurt most of that season. And the next season comes back, wins a Silver Slugger in the shortened season. It's okay, we got something. And it just feels like as it went along, I don't think he got the most out of himself. And injuries happen, but it does seem like there was a lot left on the table. And it was one of those guys they paid early. And you kind of question the effort was there at times, which is a shame because he was one of the funner players to have. He had a great personality. But that kind of embodied why that rebuild failed. The guys like Eloy and Moncada and them not panning out. It just, it was a disappointing end to someone that we should have been talking about sticking it to the Cubs fans for years. Hey, we got the better end of that deal. And looking back at it now, did we really? No, no one won in that trade. So sad end for him. Tanner Banks, I was really happy for. He was one of these guys in spring training that I was this guy's he's having a pretty good year. I was surprised they got anything for him too. So they traded him to the Phillies. They got the Phillies 11th ranked prospect. So he's now number 16 in our organization. Left-handed bat, middle infielder. He can play second base, shortstop. Respectable strikeout rate in high A right now, and he's hitting for pretty good average. 295, 350, 385 slash line. So that's who all the White Sox got back. Overall, Chris Getz, I give him. But the Fetty trade was very disappointing. Especially seeing what the other ones get. So we'll see how these guys pan out. Little underwhelming. We'll give them a C- for now as a trade deadline as a whole. But there's a lot of work they got to do with these guys. And I hope they get the Crochet thing figured out for this offseason, because that was going to be the one that was really going to restock your farm system. But you know what? I'm team Crochet for that one. I don't blame Getz for being upset. I appreciated his honesty too, because a lot of times with Rick Hahn, you'd get the word salad answers. So these guys are asking him questions, and he gave an honest answer. So no, nothing. I don't have anything against what he said, but Crochet was in the right for handling how he handled it. And, he doesn't really owe the White Sox anything as far as hey, I get we're having conversations, but he's trying to do what's best for him. Ian also here, we got in the chat, rumors swirling that Eloy and Yohan need to be wrangled in AZ to work out. That's not a good sign. I actually heard a rumor too, speaking with like Moncada, that it sounds like, and this is just purely rumor, you go through Twitter, obviously everything on the internet, as you all know, is always true that you find. But like I was reading a couple things that was like, Moncada, they were hearing like he thinks it's going to be best for his value if he doesn't play again this season. He doesn't really want to be back. And so like the rehab keeps getting delayed. He wants to play as little as possible this season. I wouldn't be surprised if they just put him on the Phantom IL and he does not play again. But I'd also, it might have been Ian who was the one I read it from, but like, yeah, he was saying that Eloy and Yohan, they needed to be wrangled in Arizona to try and get them to work out. They were doing the bare minimum, which if you watch their product on the field, given the talent, it makes sense. I mean, people will tell you who they are. Believe me, we watch these guys for years. That it makes sense that they were not the hardest workers, and that's why we are where we are. This perpetual rebuild. We got 17 losses in a row. I almost feel bad for Pedro at this point. Earlier in this year, I would have said fire him. There's no point in keeping him on the roster. But at this point, what are we gaining by firing the guy? The whole coaching staff's probably not going to be there next year anyway. So, but even by firing, you put in an interim. I mean, yeah. So Ian said they don't want to see him anymore this year. It doesn't do him any good to keep him around, which is true. And especially, I guess, if you got a lot of these prospects you're calling up, you really don't want Pedro's stink all over them as far as poor development. Because like we haven't seen any of these guys really develop into what we thought they were going to be. One of the more disappointing players this year has been Dom Fletcher for the Sox, especially because Josh Barfield, that was a guy who knew, our assistant GM, like was in Arizona all those years. And they kind of had their pick between him and McCarthy. McCarthy's been tearing it up this year, and Fletcher's been bouncing up and down between the minor leagues and the majors. So now that's one good thing with the Tommy Pham being cleared out. I think Fletcher's going to get a little bit more runway to kind of he'll be able to finish the rest of the season with some consistent playing time. So it'll be better to evaluate what we got there. But yeah, Pedro, it's just kind of one of those things that you like. You almost feel bad for, because like I get like let's be honest, he's been a terrible manager, but this is a terribly constructed roster. I mean, there's only so much you can do in the bullpen. Like with the amount of blown saves they've had this year, I think it was like 27 last I checked. It's like an insane amount of blown saves. And so there's only so much you can do as a manager because you got no bullpen to really work with. And now it's obvious that like the players have already kind of quit on. I don't think he inspires much confidence, but yeah, it's gotten to the point you can't just blame him. I mean, it's a poorly constructed roster, and this is what you get. But if you can't appreciate how spectacularly bad the season's been, like honestly, you can't even get upset after losses anymore. You watch this train wreck, and it's like I almost kind of hope they break the record. I think 23 is the longest losing streak in MLB history, and we're at 17 right now. We already broke the franchise record, so you know what? Might as well just go for 23. Drew Thorpe's been another pitcher that's gotten a lot of talk, and Steve Stone brought up a good point. So there was a nice dive they were doing, just switching gears here, a little bit quieter news, I guess, depending how you look at it. Drew Thorpe, they got back in the Dylan Cease trade. Looks just like Dylan Cease too, with the mustache. Dylan Cease, he throws a perfect game last week. Happy for him, or no hitter, I should say. Very happy for him. It was kind of a cool little storyline too, with him coming so close, one strike away from a no hitter with the White Sox. Luis Arraez breaks it up, and then Arraez becomes his teammate in San Diego. He's the one to hand him the no-hitter ball. So I really liked that. It's kind of a nice baseball. You come full circle. But he's gotten a lot of talk now because after Dylan threw that perfect game, it's like, man, the White Sox keep letting go all these good pitchers. Now we got this Drew Thorpe guy who looks a little bit like Dylan Cease, and he had a rough outing the other night. He's kind of had two in a row, but the one he didn't even make it out of the first inning, gave up 8 runs. Steve Stone was pointing out with that changeup, because what the Mariners were doing, they were sitting on the changeup, which had been his best pitch up to that point. He had thrown it more than any other pitch, that and his fastball, which only sits around 92. But they were saying they were sitting on the changeup and then adjusting to everything else. And that seemed to be the strategy. And so there's been a lot of concern now with Thorpe, because that fastball sits in the low 90s, that like, hey, he might need to add another couple mile hours of velocity, because if he's not getting ahead in the count, then it's going to be an issue. I'm not terribly worried about Thorpe yet at this point. There's still going to be a learning curve to go through, even though he was good in his first couple starts. I still do think he is a good pitcher. His thing is like, you just got to get ahead of the count and throw strikes. But this is the best season to allow a guy to come up and struggle. You learn on the job. That's what Giolito credited Rick Renteria with doing. He's like, hey, he allowed me to struggle. Like then with that famously worst pitcher in baseball. I think that's just kind of what Thorpe's going to need to do as he kind of works in some more of his other pitches. But he does with the changeup. It's really nice. I was looking at a breakdown of it. He throws it around the same arm slot as his fastball. So that's how he's able to kind of get away from it, like get away with having the fastball in the low 90s. Now, I do think he's still going to have to add a couple miles an hour on that, like as many people have said, to be more effective with the changeup. But I still think that changeup plays really well. It's just hitters have had to kind of adjust to it because they know that's what he's going to throw the most. Now ball's in his court. He's got to make an adjustment. So we'll see where that is. But that's going to be interesting to watch as the season goes along. I still have a lot of confidence in Thorpe. And people forget you still got Iriarte down in the minors too, who interesting bat down there. So that's not even the full return from that trade. But I'm not too worried about Drew Thorpe yet, just because he had 2 bad outings. He's looked good for the majority of his starts. Hitters have just adjusted to him. It happens. It's major leagues. Now it's time for him to adjust. Ian in the chat says, possibly it will let Dom relax, perform a little bit more, as ABs in Charlotte look a lot more relaxed and comfortable than his MLB ABs. So he's talking Dom Fletcher. I hope he pans out. The defense, what's been rough with him, watching him in the major leagues. I have not watched a ton of Charlotte night games, so I can't speak to what he's looked like down there. The defense has been a lot more disappointing than I thought. Now, they were playing him center field, and he was for a lot of when Robert was hurt, and he was more of a right fielder in Arizona. But the defense has not been great. That's been one of the more disappointing things with him. If it's not going to be hit for average, I would like to see the defense be a little bit better. But again, now he's going to get a little bit more runway. I would hope they give him consistent playing time so he can get the chance to figure that out. We get a large sample size to see what we have in this guy. So, I do think it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of the season pans out. Do they break the all-time loss record? Do some more of these guys get called up? Will we see Montgomery this year? I would vote no, just because I think if you keep Pedro the rest of the season, which Jerry probably would, because why they want to pay another manager. I don't want those prospects to have the stink of Pedro and his poor development. And I also think there's something to be said, like coming up together, winning together. Caro hit another home run the other night. So I would not be upset if Montgomery spent the rest of the season in AAA with some of those guys. But we'll see. We'll see how they play it out. Should be interesting. I appreciate all of you for hopping on. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next Wednesday. We had to go Thursday this week because of scheduling conference, but usually conflict. Usually each week, Pinwheels pregame show Wednesdays at noon. And as always, tune in to Pinwheels and Ivy. You can check out their episode last night where Aldo and Fids, they broke down the Cubs trade deadline. So Christopher Morel, he got shipped out of town, kind of surprised a lot of people. Fids really liked that move. So you can listen to what him and Aldo had to say last night from that episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your week.